You all right?
Just clearing my throat, Steve, getting ready to launch yet another scintillating episode of the Chinwag.
Great to see you, my friend.
Great
as
to
always.
see you. Yes, great to see you as always. What's been going on, Steve? What's new? What's going on behind the mask of Stephen Ozma? What's actually going on?
I'm like a series of masks, and then like you get to the other side, and there's nothing there. It's just masks.
You're like an onion, Steve. You're like the onion. Yeah,
of postmodern selves just floating out there.
Aren't we all though, Steve? Seriously, aren't we all?
Well, you're the actor. This is what you do for a living.
It is
buddy.
what I do for a living, and it's disconcerting sometimes to be like.
Do you ever have you ever sitting at home like, who am I really?
Do you think maybe I'm sitting at home sometimes wondering who am I really? Maybe I'm sitting around thinking that sometimes? It's alarming sometimes. I'll tell you an interesting phenomenon that's happened to me lately. Sometimes I'll see myself on like a talk show or something.
Oh.
Or I'll see myself, even sometimes I'll see this or I'll listen to this. And I'll think, I don't believe that guy. I don't believe what he's saying. He's a bad actor. And then I'll see myself in a movie or something where I'm playing a character and I'm like, now I believe me.
Oh, that's crazy.
That's fucked up, isn't it?
It's
really
actually
weird.
Super interesting though, because like, what does it say about like truth? Because people use this about acting and theater, that there's a kind of artistic truth.
Yeah.
And you're sort of more believable as a character than you are on the Chinwag.
No, it's weird. And it almost relates to that kind of thing. You feel more comfortable around a stranger sometimes than you do somebody you've known for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really weird, right? But honestly, I will sometimes look and just go, don't believe a word coming out of my mouth when I see myself at a talk show, but 100% believe that I'm the second president of the United States. Oh yeah, I buy that. I mean, I buy it. I don't know if anybody else does, but it's interesting. It's interesting.
I'll tell you what I believe. Yeah. You're in this role of 30 coins, and you play like sort of the devil, or even worse than the devil. Yes. I believe that guy.
Oh, good. Okay, that's good.
There's the real Paul Giamatti.
Listen, I believe. Yeah, it's weird. No, it's super weird though. It is that weird thing of like maybe there's nobody home, but I do feel like I'm going to get really kind of, I don't know what the word is, Pollyannish, or kind of crunchy but I believe that there is a way in which, as an actor, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm going to.
Do it.
As an actor, I feel I am somewhat privileged to play around with the whole idea that there's somebody here.
Oh, that's totally legit.
I know, but I sound kind of like, but I do. I'm like,
smarmy to you?
Yeah, smarmy or something. Kind of like, oh boy, okay, here he goes. Here goes the actor.
I think it's
but
true.
I do. Like, I'm privileged to be able to go, well, there's nobody here. There is nobody home. There actually isn't anybody here. There's nobody.
Well, they say, that is what the philosophers now of the sort of postmodern variety think, that that's really what all of us are. There used to be the myth, they say, that you have these masks, but there's an authentic self inside there somewhere. And now the postmoderns are saying, there's no authentic self.
No, I don't think there is. I think it's all you construct it, but it's not a bad thing. It's not a scary thing.
Yeah, it may not be.
To me, it's a liberating thing. You don't have to be fixed in one thing. You know what I mean? None of us are. It's much harder to be fixed in one thing. But we have to be fixed in one thing to function in society, right? I mean,
that's true.
You can't run around just being like blah, 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 blah. Just
yeah,
I mean, I get paid for it.
All the time.
Yeah, I get paid to do it. And then,
but not
therefore,
at home. You're not like making dinner and like, I'm going to be fucking John Adams now.
Well, I mean, yes, I am actually. I mean, that's the thing. And it's like, I'm allowed to do that. And it's like, I'm given the carte blanche. And again, and then I said to myself, well, no wonder people mistrusted actors, because it's like, you're deliberately going, I'm not here. I'm something else. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's weird.
I think people, schlubs like me, like secretly want to be able to just be the king today and the pauper tomorrow, and the
schlubs like you. Give me a break. But you're thinking about this stuff all the time too.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's true.
It's just that it's like you can be, I mean, we are different all the time. I mean, 5 minutes from now, I'm a different person. I mean, we're always like changing. And I think that there's some way to acknowledge that's not a bad thing. To go, I don't know. I'm not the same guy.
That's the idea in Buddhism too.
Yeah.
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 In Buddhism, you're a different self from moment to moment, and there's no like permanent soul underneath there.
Right.
But that's very weird. It's hard to relate to.
It is hard to relate to, because how you get through your day being just like, oh, I'm just a, but also it's like, you don't want to give you, it's not giving you carte blanche to suddenly just be like, I'm going to be an asshole to you because I suddenly feel like it. You know what I mean? It's like, there's societal demands that say you can't just suddenly change your fucking mind.
There's prison.
Well, sure. And there's all kinds of things that, there's just basic like decency where you can't suddenly like decide, I don't like it, I'm going to smack you at Starbucks because you fucked up my coffee. You know what I mean? And it's just like,
it's true. Social life is constraining you at every moment when you're out in it, and even when you're at home, you're almost judging yourself through your social experiences. You're like,
totally.
Oh, I can't do that because what if somebody saw me doing that?
Totally. All that kind of stuff.
Anyway,
this is a deep conversation. This is a whole other, this is a deep conversation though. I like it. See, this is the Chinwag. And if you like this content, if you're still with us, if you're still listening to this bullshit, you please like give us, go and rate us somewhere. Would you think about doing
head on down to Apple Podcasts, or anywhere where you're listening to your podcast. And thanks also to Spotify for showing us so much love. We want to welcome our new listeners and thank you all for your ongoing support of Chinwag.
And send this along to friends. Just send them a link so that they can come and enjoy this kind of quality podcast.
It's kind of random, meandering.
No, this is the quality podcasting that you enjoy, that you seek out every day. All right. I'm very excited for our next guest. Yeah. This is a person I've actually known for a long time. I may have known some of these other, but I think maybe this person I've known for, I don't know how many years, over 20 years, 25 years.
Is that right? Really?
I would think so, yes. She works, among all the other things she does, she works at one of the greatest bookstores in the country and in my opinion in the world. Great used bookstore, Iliad Bookshop in Los Angeles. Iliad. That's Iliad, I-L-I-A-D. Iliad. And it is a great bookstore, and is it
huge or is it just
big.
quality?
It's pretty sizable, and it's quality. It's really good stuff. It's like people, you can tell you got people buying the books and it's a used bookstore, and
it's curated,
rare and used and secondhand. You can tell the people who work the place care about books. And there's cats. Cool. There's a lot of cats wandering around. It's that kind of place.
That's why you like it.
And I do. I like that. And they got everything on every subject, but everything, every conceivable subject. Amazing depth of stuff they have. But particularly for me, it's good with like science fiction and horror, good genre stuff, really good genre sections. And so it's a fantastic place. It's just the best.
I'm going to check it out.
You really should. Next time you're out there in the valley, out in Los Angeles.
In the valley.
Gotta love the valley. Anyway, she is also, in addition to working at this wonderful bookstore, screenwriter, author, 6-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award.
That's amazing.
Now, if you want to win an award, don't you want to win the Bram Stoker Award? I mean, that sounds so cool. She's also a renowned Halloween and paranormal expert. Her recent books include Calling the Spirits, The History of Seances, and The Art of the Zombie Movie, which is amazing. Yeah.
Great books, both of them.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
She also has a weekly podcast called The Ghost Report with Lisa Morton, where she tells her weekly ghost report in 3 to 5 minutes each week. It's worth checking out. It's great how much information she gets into a small space.
Yeah, that's for when you really don't have a lot of time. No. I need a 3-minute podcast.
But it's amazing how much stuff she gets into it. It's really awesome. And she's amazing. She's great. And so anyway, we're thrilled to have her here on the Chinwag. Please welcome Lisa Morton. Hi, Lisa Morton.
Well, hi, Paul Giamatti.
How are you?
I'm very
Lisa.
good. Hi,
welcome
Steve.
to the Chinwag.
This is Stephen. This is my colleague, Stephen Asma.
Good afternoon.
It's funny, Lisa, seeing you not in that bookstore.
Right.
It's very funny. I think I have to have been going there for 20 some odd years, I think. Yeah, when I first started going out to LA. It's the Iliad bookstore out in Los Angeles. And I had seen you in there for so many years, and I'd read your books not knowing that you were the person writing these books.
That's
And
hilarious.
it was hilarious. And then one day I just put it together because I was looking at your book on seances and I was like, who is this woman? And I looked at the picture in the back and I was like, wait a minute, I know her. And it was just very
That's
nice.
bizarre.
Anyway,
I like to keep my superhero secret identity.
it's very much like that. It really is. It's fantastic. Anyway, thank you for coming. And I think you're one of these people where it's almost like we have probably too much to talk to you.
Yeah, you have
about.
written a lot of stuff, and we read the Seance book. The zombie book is out now.
Yes. And to that end, I was just going to mention, I just saw a thing in the New York Times about people creating these AI versions of their deceased loved ones to talk to communicate. Have you seen this? Are you aware of this?
Wow.
I have heard a little bit about that. I didn't read this particular article yet.
Neither have I yet, but it's a thing, I suppose.
How does it work? It has their voice, or something emulates their voice?
Yes, I think that's what it is. I think it's just like it's chatbot, and it literally, I mean, I don't know whether it's an auditory thing or what it is, or whether you're like speaking to them. I don't know how it works exactly, but it seems super bizarre. And all of this like weird technology. Somebody else was just telling me today about this ghost hunter app on their phones, which I know you get into in the book, but have you used that thing? Have you actually ever experienced it?
I have. I found it howlingly funny myself, but I also didn't get any actual ghost. I guess the way it works, it looks like a little radar screen with little dots that are beeping, supposedly as you get closer to a ghost. And when you actually come up on one, it will take a photo of them. Now, of course, people have noted that the photos all tend to look alike and come from a library of photos. But I have yet to actually get one of the photo things. So
Amazing. The charlatanry of this whole thing is kind of interesting. I mean, it's really, and it's something we definitely, as we get into it, we wanted to ask you about how much you buy of this, because I don't know how much you actually, how skeptical you are from, you buy very little of it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
And so do you have experience with ghosts in any way? Do you believe in ghosts and not believe in this stuff, or?
I try to be an authentic skeptic, which means that I am open to all kinds of possibilities. I was extremely skeptical before I wrote a book called Ghost to Haunted History. And you cannot write a book about 50,000 years of ghost sightings and retain complete skepticism, I think, because it's too universal, it's too global. And I encountered too many people who have witnessed things, and they are all completely earnest in their belief, and I do not ever discount that.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is that they've experienced, and I'm not completely convinced that it's spirits of the dead.
That's a good way to put it, actually.
Yeah, it is. Have you experienced anything now?
I had one odd experience, which happened in the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. If you don't know that place, it is a legendary resort hotel that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining.
Oh.
It is tucked way up in the Colorado Rockies, somewhat isolated, and it's supposed to be, some paranormal investigators call it the Disneyland of ghosts. It's supposed to be very haunted. And I was there in 2014 doing an overnight paranormal investigation as part of a large group. And it was about 3 a.m, and we were in one of the outbuildings, not the main hotel. We were in a concert hall. And the concert hall is supposed to be haunted by a number of spirits on its own. And we were using a device called a spirit box. And if you don't know what this is, it's a thing that looks kind of like an old-fashioned transistor radio that rapidly scans radio frequencies. And occasionally words will blurt through this thing. And we were there 3 a.m. This thing had been running for 20 minutes with nothing, and it suddenly blurted out this word that sounded like Mostelaria. Now, most people, of course, would have no idea what that is, but because I had been working on this book about the history of ghosts, I knew that was the Latin name of a play that translates to The Haunted House by Plautus.
Really?
Oh, nice.
Really?
So to hear that coming from this thing at 3 a.m. in the middle of this isolated Colorado hotel, is startling, but I chalk it up to pareidolia, which is the human mind's propensity to try to put things into shape and make sense of things. And I'm guessing it was probably some DJ in the middle of the Colorado Rockies saying something like most of the area.
Right.
But, the fact that my brain put that together.
Sure, of course.
Is just as amazing to me as the idea that there are ghosts. So.
Right. Well, that's what we're always
saying. And then did Scatman Crothers show up in the kitchen? And sorry. When I lived in other parts of the world where ghost beliefs are very high, like in the developing world, I noticed that I started to lose some of my skepticism. And it was almost like in the same way that you gather patterns of language or speech in a new place, you start to gather like patterns of thought or habits of thought. And I began to think like, yeah, the idea that there are spirits or ghosts and dead relatives all around you, it's part of the local culture. And it seems much more compelling when you're in that culture.
Yeah, and there have been many psychological studies done that have backed that kind of thinking up. For example, they'll take a control group of people, put them in a room in a very old building, and tell them the place is haunted. And something like 70% of those people will come out and say they think it is haunted, as compared to like 20% of a group that is not told the building is haunted. So, yeah, that definitely influences what we perceive, I think.
And so it's like you prime the jury almost. And so it turns out to be a much bigger psychological effect on people, and we forget about it.
And that's one of the things that sort of interests me about the whole sort of, I mean, in the book on seances, I mean, it's amazing the amount of information you get in there. Like, it's really cool. And I was saying to Steve, it's so funny. It's one of those kinds of books when I read it, I go, after reading something that's this dense and relates to so many different things, you start to go, the history of mankind is the history of talking to the dead, because this just seems like such an intrinsic part of everything through history. But like the sort of explosion of interest in it is weird. Like, why suddenly these things happen? Like, why suddenly it goes from these more kind of primitive things that are more tied to religion or things like that. Not that it wasn't tied to religion as it went on, but like suddenly this explosion of interest in kind of the 18th century. Am I right? Is that when sort of it begins to become what we identify now as kind of talking to the dead and spiritualism?
Really 19th century, mid-19th century. And I think it directly ties into the Industrial Revolution. I think people were feeling their lives change so much in ways they had no control over. They were feeling kind of abandoned. They had been through the Enlightenment when a lot of the philosophers told them your spiritual beliefs mean nothing. So they were looking to cling on to something. And along come these two teenage girls in New York, upstate New York, who say, we have found a way of communicating with the dead. And it was something that involved a group. They were demonstrating this for large groups of people at first, and then it became the seance, which was the first time that talking to the dead involved a big group of people. So it was
and this was the Fox sisters, right?
Fox
Is that the
sisters,
two girls?
Okay. Exactly. Yeah, Katie and Maggie. And it was kind of, to me, a revolution in thinking about how these things would work. And for the first time, talking to the dead was not something that was involved with magic or a solitary seeker, that kind of thing.
So up until then, it had been this sort of, you will go alone into some sort of cave with a sort of, I mean, the idea was, right, you'd consult on your own some person that's going to, I mean, an oracle, that's not the same thing though, right? Oracles were different, right? That's not the same thing as a medium, right?
They were sometimes tied into mediumship and communicating from the dead, but often oracles were thought to be communicating from a god. They were passing a message on from a god. And but yes, there were many magicians and so forth, necromancers in the medieval times who were performing these insane rituals. I mean, you can find their grimoires and their spell books, and you just go, what? I mean, you have to wear the pelt of a lion and take a dragon's eye out to the crossroads. And so they were essentially impossible. And one of the things I also think is really interesting about the seance is that people not only absolutely expected the dead to communicate through the mediums, but they expected them to answer questions. Anything
Yeah.
that you asked, it was like you were in command of these spirits, which was also something that was relatively new. In the past, the seeker would go and hope for some communication that would pretty much be at the whim of the spirit. But
Yeah,
now,
can I ask
that's
about that in
interesting.
particular? I remember reading that in your book, and if you contrasted it with like the Mexican tradition of Day of the Dead and the Chinese like grave sweeping sort of holiday, and those, I think if I remember you right, those are more like we want to respect the dead, and the dead are the agents. They are the ones that are deciding what to do. But is it something about American spiritualism that's like, okay, you need to come and
That's
answer my
interesting.
questions.
You're going to do
and
what
make me
I
feel
tell you to
better.
do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
Why is it?
yeah, I don't know if I would say American, only because the spiritualism, which is the religion that built up around this, was equally popular in the UK and in parts of Europe as well. But there definitely is some kind of, I don't know, egotistical or something mindset there to expecting the dead to just go, yeah, here you go. Here's the answers.
You're going to command them. But the Fox sisters were really the epicenter of it, right? I mean, there wasn't a parallel thing happening in the UK, was there, or in Europe?
Well, the Fox sisters traveled to the UK, and they started this kind of trend in superstar mediums, and they were not even the most famous at the time. Probably the most famous of all the spiritualist mediums in the 19th century was a guy named D.D. Hume, Daniel Douglas Hume, and this was a guy who was said to be able to levitate, to expand his body. He could like grow his weird stuff, hold burning coals in his hand.
What about ectoplasm? Did he have ectoplasm coming out?
I know. Ectoplasm is a whole other thing I'm super fascinated by.
You want to wait on
that? Yeah, just wait a second on that. So he was sort of at the same time, or he's an outgrowth of this sort of thing?
He was just about slightly after the Fox sisters, but very close to the same time. And there was a couple of other mediums from that time period I love as well. There was one named Agnes Guppy. I mean, right off the bat, you got to love the name. And Mrs. Guppy was skilled in something called apporter. It's Apport. And apports was the idea that she could make things magically materialize in front of you during the seance. And
fascinating.
Yeah, they had a lot of really crazy beliefs then. And a lot of the different star mediums kind of had their own little areas of specialty.
I was going to say, did each one of them have a shtick that they kind of worked up?
Like writing, automatic writing and stuff too, right?
That was in there. Slate writing, which was where, of course, you took a little tiny slate and wrote spirit messages on it. And producing phosphorescent globes that would fly over people's head, musical instruments that would
what's with the trumpets? There was a whole thing with sort of trumpets, right? Like what was that? Spirit trumpets, right?
There were a lot of musical things, and the idea was that you would be sitting in a seance and these things would float over your head and they would play music. And one of the instruments that people really loved for this particular demonstration was the accordion, which is probably because it's so easy to produce sounds out of that thing.
That's true, yeah. And you touch it and it will make a sound. Yeah, that's very funny. But the Fox sisters, it was rapping and stuff, right? It was sort of like
knocking on the table or something.
Yeah, and it was what we would call a poltergeist too. Was there any sense of that around them? Which I always take to be this sort of manifestation, which they always say it manifests around adolescent girls and things like that, that it particularly sort of is this energy. And so was there any sense of that too? I mean, it all seems to overlap in some ways with these other kinds of things, but was there a poltergeist sense with them, that it was like some thing was happening around them?
Well, it's what we would call poltergeist now. Back then, they didn't have that whole separate belief. But yes, when it started with the Fox sisters, they were living in this huge old farmhouse. And they were hearing these rapping noises like coming from the walls and the floors and so forth. And when it turned into a seance was when they told their parents, we can communicate with these things. And they would knock in response and they would get messages back. And if you don't know the ultimate secret of the Fox sisters, It turned out to be, and this is very weird,
Yes.
that they could actually crack their toe knuckles in a way that was so extraordinary,
So loud.
That's the miracle.
so loud, you could hear it in the back of an auditorium.
What?
That's fantastic.
I've heard that and I can't get my head around it. Like, I don't understand what that even means. Like, how's that possible?
What a gift.
And frankly, that's much weirder than
It's even weirder than the dead
That's
returning.
so weird. God, and that was the source of a lot of the rappings and things like that. And
But I thought that one sister, here's what I heard. You've got to correct me on this, but I thought one sister died without ever sort of confessing. The other sister confessed near the end of her life, but then retracted it again. What have I misunderstood that?
There were 3 sisters from the Fox family who engaged in this, and one of them was an older sister named Leah, and Leah essentially acted as a manager to Katie and Maggie, who were the 2 younger ones. And towards the end of her life, in I think 1888, Maggie confessed everything. And
really,
Maggie,
just full on confession.
She confessed it all, and the reason she did it was that there was a famous trial taking place at the time with a fraudulent medium, and she was apparently horrified to be compared to that, and so she confessed all of her fraud, and her confessions actually are kind of heartbreaking. They're all written down. You can read them in a little pamphlet you can find online. And the part that really got me was when she said that she had tried to communicate with the spirits of the dead, and she had even gone to cemeteries at night alone and had sat on a grave and had hoped for some communication, and nothing ever came. And her sister Katie went along with the confession without sort of backing it up. She was just kind of quiet in backing it up. But then both of them died not long after that, essentially both of alcoholism. So they didn't have happy lives towards the end, unfortunately.
This is sort of the interesting thing, is that, like, to what extent are these people purely charlatans, and to what extent do they actually think they have?
Yeah.
I find it super fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, to what extent have they convinced themselves that they're doing something real, and therefore it's okay to, like, fake some things sometimes because it gets stuff going. They're
true believers.
Yeah.
They're not cynical charlatans. They might be true believers that then nudge it or something.
It's so interesting to me, though, that thing of self-deception, which I guess is, that's interesting to me. Like, what is with that? And do you think a lot of these people did sincerely believe it, and some of them were pure charlatans? Or
I think you've nailed it. I think some of them thought they really had these abilities, and that they would have to sometimes resort to a little extra something, which is how they would explain it if they got caught.
yeah,
And one of the most interesting of the mediums from this time, who I always point to in terms of some of them obviously really, truly, genuinely believed in what they were doing, was a woman named Georgiana Houghton, who was British, never achieved the kind of superstar status at the time of a lot of her peers, but she claimed that when she was in a trance state as a medium, she was communicating with the spirits of great artists. And she produced about 300 paintings, which during her life, no one was interested in. And those paintings are now regarded as the beginning of surrealism.
Oh, really?
And they're absolutely glorious. If you haven't seen one, go Google her, look at them.
Wow.
They are beautiful.
What's their name again?
Georgiana, and the last name is Houghton.
That's
And
amazing.
you mentioned also in the book Hilma af Klint, and
Oh, yeah.
Paul and I have talked about her.
Oh, right, Hilma af Klint right over there.
It's so awesome. That those spiritual artworks had a huge influence. They were like way ahead of their time. But I think it also is interesting that the whole spiritualist movement was so much driven by women, and it was about female emancipation, and it was abolitionist. It really was for all of its flaky stuff, it had all these wonderful qualities too. I don't know, I mean, there's a sense in which, are they just hallucinating stuff, or are they having a kind of a psychedelic experience?
Yeah,
and then they're
a
just
kind of
interpreting
psychic
it in a
experience
certain
that
way.
yeah, right. They're having some sort. We talk about this all the time, Steve and I. This sort
Yeah.
of like your imagination running riot and you not being able to discern the difference necessarily. And so some of these people, maybe that's what was going on here, going into weird trances and having weird sort of dream states.
Yeah, I'm sure that was the case with Georgiana Houghton in particular.
I think the idea, and you mentioned this too in the book, that a lot of the seances and mediums come out of an earlier tradition of mesmerism and animal magnetism. And I have this pet theory, which I'm not going to press too hard, but I think people have a kind of animal awareness that comes from our mammalian evolution. It's almost like a sixth sense. We call it like a gut instinct. And you can sort of feel in a room certain things, but you can't say exactly why you're feeling that way or what it is. But it's almost like a kind of very sensitive conditioning. And I think some of this medium stuff is related to that real sensitive conditioning and empathy.
I think you're right. And it's interesting. One of the questions I set out to answer when I was writing the book on the history of ghosts was, why are we so afraid of ghosts? Because you would think that if you were presented with something standing in front of you that proves that there is life after death, it would be the most glorious moment of your life. I mean, you'd be like, oh, thank God. And yet it is absolutely universal that people are terrified of these things. And I'm with you, Stephen. I think it's almost some kind of hardwired thing with us. And I will even go so far as to think, I think there is a neurological factor involved there, which is something that is constantly under investigation, that maybe there is something firing off in the part of the brain that receives EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, that affects certain people much more strongly than others. But whatever it is, it's amazing to me that people are almost universally terrified at the thought of seeing a ghost.
But Steve and I were going to mention that we talked to a medium. We talked to Teresa Caputo, and and Steve's take on. I mean, Steve handled it extremely well. I thought.
I said that she gave us both readings, and I really liked her. She's a very sweet.
She was great.
Fun person.
She was amazing. I thought she was amazing.
I thought she had an amazing talent, but it wasn't what she thought it was. That she's very empathic and can read a person is suffering and knows how to say the right thing to console them, but that's not what she thinks she's doing, which is actually channeling the dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it, I really respect.
No, and it's but an extraordinary level of sort of empathy, like an extraordinary level of empathy that allows you to read things, such fine signals about people that you can sort of, it's like you're reading their mind, and then it's like you're interpreting what they want to hear or something, or you're finding what it is they're looking for. They're a bit like, I mean, good actors. I mean, they're a bit like really good performers, which is another thing I think is so interesting about this stuff, is the extent to which it sort of becomes, I mean, and you say the arts of like the woman is painting and stuff, but it's so connected to sort of performance too. And sort of how much was going on of like magic shows and stuff at the same time? Was that happening as well? Was that sort of in vaudeville and stuff, and theaters and stuff? Weren't guys doing magic shows that almost sound the same as these things?
Yeah, in fact, it wasn't even almost sounding the same. It was exactly the same in many regards. And
Really?
That's one of the reasons that the first group of people to really debunk a lot of these mediums were often the magicians.
Oh, yeah.
Who got very kind of upset at the fact that these people were using the same techniques that they were using, and where the magicians were saying it's all entertainment, it's trickery, it's sleight of hand, it's illusion. The mediums were using the same techniques and effects, except saying, no, it's real. It's really ghosts and spirits from the beyond. And that's one of the reasons that magicians went after the mediums so often. Houdini, before Houdini, there was a really interesting British magician named J.N. Maskelyne. And he was a very famous debunker at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, and ended up, in fact, very famously losing one lawsuit where he tried to expose a medium.
Really?
And it was a fascinating trial. He lost because the medium in question had been able to produce ectoplasm.
Okay. Here we go. No. I just wanted to get. I wanted to get to it more naturally. But yes, okay.
Had produced ectoplasm from his torso, which had materialized into sort of a figure, and then had pulled it back in. Well, Maskelyne took the jury to one of his stage performances, duplicated it perfectly, but he lost because the jury said he didn't pull it back in at the end.
Oh, come on.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I don't know.
It's a biased jury.
That's fantastic. All right. We're at ectoplasm, and ectoplasm is one of the weirdest parts of this that I've always found super fascinating. And what is what is the ectoplasm? What is the whole idea of ectoplasm? Please, just
educate us on ectoplasm, please.
Ectoplasm was this kind of whitish material that certain physical mediums would produce. There were kind of two different mediums working around that turn of the last century, the physical mediums and the trance mediums. And the physical mediums were the ones who would produce some physical effect, whether it was a sound or even a smell or a sight, whatever. And the ectoplasm was something that would manifest from their bodies. Usually it might come out of their mouth, it might come out of their ears or just their torso or whatever. And it was this filmy whitish material, and it might or might not take on a shape of something like a person or a face. And it was thought to be the sort of matter of the spirits. And, it was
a subtle
you're contacting some impalpable, you're manifesting some, you've merged with some dimension and it's now manifesting out your nose. This like white shit is coming out your nose.
Yeah, and one of my favorite mediums who produced ectoplasm was a woman named Helen Duncan. Helen Duncan was throughout the first part of the 20th century. She was very famous. And Helen Duncan, again, talking about these weird abilities like toe knuckle cracking that seem as magnificent as spirits of the dead. Helen Duncan could regurgitate at will.
God almighty.
So she would, apparently, before she was going to do a sitting, she would swallow a length of cheesecloth.
Okay.
And during the sitting, she could produce this at will. And of course, if you're in a sitting with this woman and the lights are very low and you are, as we said earlier, primed, you see this whitish material that you can't really see in the semi-darkness coming out.
That would freak me out.
Yes, it would be very strange.
I'm on board,
It would be very weird. Yeah. Couldn't Houdini regurgitate at will too? Didn't he swallow keys and things like that and then regurgitate them? Didn't he? I thought he actually could do that too. And so the stuff would come out, it would go back in sometimes because obviously Helen Duncan would just eat it again. She would just
but how does it form like a figure? That sounds really like some good magic.
Yeah.
Well, what they would do usually was, for example, if it was forming a face, they would, and one of the mediums got busted with this, they would take a picture out of a magazine and layer it into the cheesecloth, which then when they would produce, you'd see in this, again, you're in this semi-darkness, you see this face in the cheesecloth. And one of the, I think it was a very famous woman named Eusapia Palladino got busted when someone recognized the face from their own magazine.
Oh, God.
Hey, that's Kim Kardashian. What's going on?
Yeah, right, totally. Helen Duncan, sort of the Second World War era, right? So this stuff persisted for a while.
The war is crucial in triggering the sort of rise of these seances, right? Because so many people
wars in general seem to be
wars in general,
right? I mean, the Civil War too, right? And First World War.
Any sort of mass traumatic event tends to trigger a rise of belief in the paranormal. And the first time you get this is the Civil War. And then we get it with World War I, which is when the Ouija board becomes popular, because you take a situation like World War I where so many people lost their sons or their brothers or their husbands and quite often didn't know if they were dead or not. And they are desperate for some sort of closure. So if someone comes along and hands you this board and says you don't even have to go to a medium, which can be maybe a little bit of a scary experience for the wrong reasons, You can do this in the comfort of your own home and get a message from your beloved son or husband. And then, it's interesting. I just acquired a book recently on spiritualism in the 1930s that talked about how the Great Depression continued it. Because people were, of course, desperate for any hint of how they were going to get a job or how they were going to come by some money. And then World War II again. And I
wonder if COVID is going to create an uptick.
I wonder too
interest.
if there has been an uptick in it. It feels like there has been in some ways.
There absolutely was a huge uptick.
Interesting.
And, I've already talked about that. At the beginning of the pandemic, in the first few weeks of lockdown, I said we're going to see a huge growth in paranormal.
Well, sure, especially you're sitting at home with the Ouija board and all those kinds of things. No, totally. But I was actually really surprised to read, because I bought the notion that the Ouija board had some actual origin, had some roots in something ancient. I actually thought, I bought the idea it had some ancient provenance, that it was this thing that the Egyptians were sitting around using. But it's like Freemasonry.
Hermes,
where it's like, where you just, Hermes Trismegistus and all the like Egyptian stuff and all the like temple and all this stuff. And I was amazed to see it has none. It really doesn't. When did it come? Where did it come from?
It came from mainly the Fox sisters, again, one of the ways they were communicating with the spirits was they would call out letters to get answers. So they would say, okay, knock when you hear the next letter. A, B, C, knock, knock. Okay, C.
Toe knuckle crack.
Yeah, right. And then at some point, somebody came up with the idea of, instead of them having to do this laborious calling out of the letters, just taking the letters and putting them on a tabletop. And you could just point to them, and then it would knock. And eventually that became a planchette, and that became the whole wooden Ouija board. And the Ouija board wasn't patented until the end of the 19th century.
Oh, wow. Paul, have you ever used it? Have you ever done the Ouija board?
Sure, I've done it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I have those like Parker Brothers, the like, the kind of cheapo, like, I a little while ago, I thought, I'm going to look and see. And there are indeed people who make beautiful Ouija boards. I mean, beautiful pieces of, and I'm like, I should get one. But I don't know. I don't think I can claim any great success with a Ouija board, particularly. But that was amazing. And so it was patented and then mass produced, basically.
Mm-hmm. And the patent is interesting because the patent makes no mention whatsoever of using this to communicate with spirits. The patent calls it only a parlor game and a toy.
Did the church go nuts and stuff without this, and sort of like that's a doorway into the other, into the other world and stuff like that?
Oh yeah. In 1919, the church put out a book called The New Black Magic that was all about calling out the evils of using a Ouija board.
Yeah, on this same topic, Paul and I are both interested in how Christianity sometimes will accommodate certain pagan ideas, and sometimes there's all this fine-grained distinctions. Like you were saying that St. Augustine was saying it's not the dead who are returning, but in fact, angels and demons. Mm-hmm. And that's it's kind of an odd adjustment of the theory, I guess, for theological reasons. What's the reasoning there, that once you die, you're either in heaven or hell, and so you can't come back according to Catholic theology? Is that why he was resisting that?
Yeah, the early church scholars really argued that a lot. Many of them believed in ghosts, but their theology didn't hold room for them. So they
what about limbo and stuff like that? Limbo and purgatory, they don't provide at all for like somebody that's stuck somewhere and then they could manifest as a ghost. Is that not is that not a theological thing?
Yeah, it did later on, which is interesting. But if we're talking when St. Augustine was writing, which is, I think, like the 7th century AD, it was very early on, even earlier. And they, at that point, did not have any room for ghost at all. But as you advance over the centuries, the next few centuries, more and more of the Christian scholars start to come in and debate this. And they do start to address things like purgatory and limbo. And then some of them even will suggest that ghosts are often saints who are returning to give you some useful piece of information.
Oh, really?
That
That's
is
interesting.
kind and is earned and so forth. But again, even when we talk about people in the medieval times who have seen a ghost and it may be ascribed to being a saint, they often describe it as being terrifying.
Oh.
Fascinating.
There's another one too that, like you mentioned, Madame Blavatsky is this sort of one of the originators of this.
I love
Yeah,
Madame
I know.
Blavatsky.
She's come up on the show a few times.
She comes up a lot.
But we're interested in Theosophy, which kind of is an offshoot of this spiritualism tradition, and it was very popular, I know, in the U.S. and in Europe. And Blavatsky had a strange adjustment of the theory where she said something like, "It's not your dead relatives. It's some astral body within the medium that is somehow escaping out into the room." Am I remembering this right? And then you're mistaking that?
Something like that.
You're mistaking it for a dead loved one.
Was she a medium at first before she became sort of the mother of Theosophy and stuff like that?
She was, yeah. She actually even traveled around the U.S. and so forth, working as a medium before creating Theosophy. And she was not always well liked by her peers in spiritualist circles, especially. But her philosophy certainly caught on.
I think it's actually a cool idea. Like, even if it's wackadoodle, it's cool that there might be spirits within you that could get, because you can't rule it out. It's at least as reasonable. The astral projection thing is at least as reasonable.
But that
as the
leads into
traditional
all that like
story.
Anthroposophy stuff, the Steiner stuff too, isn't it? Doesn't he think that
Rudolf
there's
Steiner?
Yeah, that there's kind of spirits in you and stuff like. Doesn't he sort of believe in that? That there's a connection between the outer spirit and the inner spirit, or something like that. I don't totally follow all that stuff, but right? Is he do that kind of thing?
Yeah. And it's like Eastern ideas are seeping in, right? I mean, a lot of this stuff is coming from reincarnation ideas in Tibet and Hinduism. And I guess the church is just not able to hold it off anymore. They're not as powerful as they used to be to censor it, I guess.
Yeah, the church always had an uncomfortable relationship with ghosts, even in the 19th century. They would go back and forth on whether they advocated spiritualism or not. Some of the bishops said, I think it's fine and it brings people closer to God or whatever. And some of them were just absolutely no, it's the devil's work. And they were never, could never come into a peaceful agreement with ghosts.
Well, that's interesting. I'd never heard that notion that they were saints coming back to sort of, that's like a bodhisattva or something, a little bit.
Yeah, that's
it's
cool.
like it's sort of somebody coming back to revisit you like that. I'd never heard that before. This was something I was going to ask you that you talked about briefly in the book. It just reminds me of it now. I wasn't aware that in Islam, there's no belief in ghosts.
Right.
And what is that? I had no idea. They think.
Yeah, it's just not part of their whole belief. The closest they get is belief in the jinn, which is where we get the sort of westernized word and idea of genie from. But the jinn are supposed to be these sort of ethereal spirits of the air who may cause mischief, who may present themselves as ghosts, but they do not believe that you leave paradise once you're there.
Once you're there. Oh my God.
Yeah, they're like another species of creature that Allah makes, I think, right? I think like they're made of smoke or fire, and humans are made of mud or dust or something like that. Something like that.
I do want to get back to ectoplasm. I'm sorry, just for a second, because I wanted to make sure. No, I wanted to make sure I got back to it, because it's part of what's interesting to me about it too is I've seen photographs of it. I've seen photographs of these people manifesting this stuff, which is so interesting because it's like this clearly just ridiculous thing being photographed in the latest technology. You know what I mean? The latest technology with the most ridiculous primitive gag being pulled in front of it is so fascinating. But it's interesting to me, and it looks insane. I mean, it just looks totally bonkers. And they do have the little faces in them and stuff like that. And it just looks crazy. But I'm interested in some of the way in which this stuff does follow along with technological developments too, right? I mean, like
Mhm.
Special
technology,
effects.
right? And photography and film must have been something that really played into this stuff. I mean, did these people get filmed? Did they appear on film? Did they make movies about these folks? I mean, I know Houdini made movies about himself, but it's not the same thing. But did they? Because it's like the movies must have just been, here they are. Here's the spirit. Here's ghosts. I mean, you can make ghosts appear in film. It
Yeah,
must
that
have been-
Georges Méliès stuff is like all
right?
supernatural
Was he
and
doing?
believable.
George Méliès is that pioneering film guy. Was he doing stuff like this, or
He was, yeah. In fact, I think the first filmed ghost movie is a Méliès movie that I think is called The Haunted Castle. It's from something
Ah.
like 1900. It's really fun. You can go see it on YouTube. But it's interesting now that you mention it that I don't recall ever hearing of any of the mediums being filmed. Photographed, yes. but
Photographed.
filmed? Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know. I would guess that maybe the sort of unless you were very trained or something in film, they probably didn't know how to deal with it early on, so it was limited to still photography.
Right.
But yeah, I've never heard of the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, that investigated a lot of the mediums. I've never heard of them filming any of the ones from early on.
That would be
It's
interesting.
ironic that now that there's the means of magical production is in everybody's pocket. It's, our iPhones and so forth. So you can make these amazing fake supernatural videos, but people's skepticism is also at an all-time high. So people are unwilling to believe even the films they're seeing because they know how easy it is to engineer them. It's a weird.
That is weird.
It's like, you
Well,
can make
but-
a hell of a ghost story, but if you're
Nobody's gonna
skeptical, you
believe
can
it.
easily dismiss it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Belief is also at an all-time high.
Well, that's interesting.
What's up? Belief in ghosts?
Belief in ghost is crazy right now, and I mean,
Or is it?
it's even crazier to me is the percentage of, for example, Americans who believe in the existence of demons is, I think, now even higher than ghosts.
Really?
It's even higher than God,
Yeah.
right? There's like more people.
Right.
believe
Is it
in
really? Is it
demons.
true? More people believe in that
I've heard
stuff,
that.
really,
I've heard that.
than believe in
Yeah.
God. That's fascinating. That's super interesting. But you can't. But ghosts, demons will possess you. You don't get possessed by a ghost ever, do you? You don't get possessed by that. Doesn't really happen, does it?
It happens that spirit possession is compared to demonic possession, but usually it's easier. In fact, the exorcist will often try to ascertain if someone has been possessed by a dead spirit or by a demon.
Interesting. Well, that was a ton of fun. We really hope you enjoyed this Chinwag. Thank you for listening. We have bonus content coming your way in a few days, so please keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to like us, follow us, rate us, and review us. All that kind of good stuff. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, wag on.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.